Hello, this is the Fight Chatter podcast being recorded on Thursday, September 18th, 2025. This is going to be episode number, I believe it's number 9. Yes, it's number 9. And I'm going to start this off. I want to talk about TKO's maiden voyage into big-time boxing. Now, this is the first one that was promoted by UFC/Zuffa Boxing/TKO. Where they're going to land on their promotional name for boxing, we'll see. I've heard the name Zuffa Boxing thrown around a ton, so we'll see where it ends up. But they ended up with a big fight card. In fact, it went down as the most viewed fight card in history, I believe. Terence Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez. If you're listening to this, I'm pretty sure that you watched the fight. The fight was entertaining. The fight was, I'm going to be honest, it was a Terence Crawford fight. If you watch Terence Crawford over the years, you know his style. You know what he brings to the table, how he likes to fight, his game plan and whatnot. And he followed that game plan that he normally does. Copy, repeat, or rinse, repeat, however you want to put that, against Canelo Alvarez. I was sitting in my barber shop. I was getting a haircut, and my son was getting a haircut. BC King's barbershop in Brigham City. Quick plug. That's not a paid advertisement. They didn't pay me to do that. Anyways, they asked me, who's your money going on this weekend? And I said, Terence Crawford. He just has a higher skill level than Canelo Alvarez. And everyone's like, no, Canelo all the way. Terence, with the age and the weight difference and whatnot, everyone was sure that Canelo Alvarez was going to win that fight. I'm not going to discount the fact that weight does play. Weight does matter. Size does matter. We have weight divisions for a reason. Oscar De La Hoya tried moving up to middleweight, and it was a total disaster. I mean, he lost to Felix Sturm. He got that decision, but almost everybody who watched that fight thought that Felix Sturm won that fight. And he lost to Bernard Hopkins. Wasn't close. Bernard was having fun in there. But when the skill level is so much higher with Terence Crawford and Canelo Alvarez, and that's not discounting Canelo Alvarez's skill. Canelo Alvarez is one of the most skilled boxers. They say he's the best pure boxer for a Mexican fighter ever. There's some other fighters I would put in there as well, but he's definitely up there, top 3 probably. And that's saying a whole lot. He's one of the best fighters of this generation. That being said, that's how good Terence Crawford is. However, the other thing that I didn't mention in the barbershop, and I've talked to other people about this, is Terence Crawford and his team, they're not stupid. They made this as a calculated choice. They knew Canelo Alvarez's strengths and weaknesses. They studied hours of fights with him because there's a lot of fights that they could study. They knew their opponent inside and out. They knew and I'm not saying that Canelo didn't do this as well. Canelo did all of this, him and his team as well. But here's the thing. If you're just looking at the weight differential there, you're being deceived. It's kind of like when Sugar Shane Mosley moved up to fight Oscar De La Hoya. There were so many people that were so certain that Shane Mosley moving up and fighting Oscar De La Hoya at welterweight, skipping super lightweight and going right up to welterweight, that he was going to be in trouble. But people who knew knew that Shane Mosley's skills were superior to Oscar De La Hoya's. Not only that, they also knew that Shane Mosley was starving himself and in order to make lightweight, and when he was able to eat and put on the pounds the right way, he was going to do, the weight wasn't going to matter. That's the same thing with Terence Crawford. Plus, these guys, you got to remember, these are $1 million decisions, and Terence Crawford isn't Jermell Charlo, who was taking the fight as a money fight, and he wasn't going to be able to make that much money fighting anybody except for Canelo. Terence Crawford could go and make 8 figures fighting whomever. He could have moved up to the middleweight division, fought the middleweight champion, probably made 10, 12, $15 million for that fight. The middleweight division's so unnoteworthy right now. No offense to those champions. I would have to look up who is the consensus number 1 middleweight right now. Because not saying that I'm being ignorant or anything. Well, maybe I am, but it's kind of one of those things where I just can't name the current middleweight champion at the time, and that's my bad before not looking it up before starting this. But anyways, the point is Terence Crawford can make 8 figures fighting anybody. He fought Canelo. Why did he fight Canelo? Because he knew he could beat him. And how does he know he could beat him? Crawford and his team most likely wouldn't be surprised if they had Crawford out there sparring with somebody that was Canelo's size, Canelo's strength, seeing how he reacted to punches, seeing how he reacted to being held on. Just those things. These guys are making $1 million decisions. They are not going to make these decisions without them being educated ones. So, as far as the fight, like I said, the fight was what it was. Terence Crawford did his thing. You look at some of Terence Crawford's other fights, and the scores of 115, 113, and 116, 112 are pretty familiar if you look at the fights that have gone the distance recently. He doesn't necessarily blow anyone out. I would say that, I said I had it 116, 112. There were 2 rounds that were pretty close that could have gone either way. I gave them to Canelo mainly because my thought process is Canelo's the champion. It's Mexican Independence Day. They're fighting in friendly Canelo waters, that he was going to get the extremely close rounds. So that's how I got to 116, 112. A couple people told me they had it 118 to 110. That's not out of the question. 115 to 113. That's definitely not out of the question. So 115 to 113 is being extremely generous to Canelo. My generosity was 116 to 112 because I definitely could have called it 118 to 110. Fight was good. It was entertaining. Was exactly what I expected it to be. I'm not saying I'm Nostradamus or anything, and I'm not saying that I'm that big of a fight expert. It's just kind of when I thought about how the fight was going to play out, it played out the way I thought it would. As far as the production, there were some things that I wasn't necessarily too fond of. I don't know why Tool was playing right before the main event. I don't know. That was kind of strange to me. All of the Mexican mariachi bands and everything that played before, that was expected. Here's the thing. I thought it looked very... a little bit too much show for me, but I'm kind of old school. I kind of thought the same thing when I saw Floyd coming out with Justin Bieber and having all that stuff. That's just me though. So I mean, that's a little more over the top for me. However, whatever. I mean, I understand that they're trying to make this more entertaining. I remember reading an interview with Mike Tyson probably about 10 or 11 years ago, might have been longer. They were asking him why he is seen at more UFC fights than boxing matches, and he said when you're at a boxing match, you're just kind of sitting around in between fights, sitting around. It's not real entertaining for the fight fan other than when there's a fight. Whereas when you go to a UFC event, in between fights and everything, they're playing loud music, it's bumping, it's going, the whole crowd's going. He said it felt like more like you were going to a nightclub or something. If that's your thing, that's fine. I mean, if you need to be entertained the entire time, that's fine. I'm not going to put that down. It's not my style, but hey, maybe I need to get with the times, grow up, get off my lawn portion of it. I wasn't particularly fond of some of Max Kellerman's comments. I thought he was being a little over the top, kind of, being too much of the company man. During that Christian Mabili versus Lester Martinez fight. By the way, that's where I came into watching it live, is the Christian Mabili versus Lester Martinez fight. That was an excellent, great fight. What I didn't like about it was at the end, the Max Kellerman and the announcers, they totally just kind of skimmed over the fact that it was a WBC interim super middleweight title fight, and were like, hey, this should have been for the BMF title. Maybe they need to bring BMF titles into boxing. It is what it is. I mean, they're towing the company line, which is perfectly fine. Things like that. Then kind of couple of moments in there where they're like, oh yeah, you're going to see a lot more evenly matched fights. And now that UFC's taken over boxing, you're not going to see any of these fights that are completely one-sided. And then they showed the Callum Walsh versus Fernando Vargas fight. Now, don't get me wrong, that was an entertaining fight. I thought it was a little bit closer than the way it was scored. However, it was a showcase for Callum Walsh. It was typical boxing. Fernando Vargas Jr., he brought in some he presented a challenge for Callum Walsh, gave Callum Walsh a few things that he's not used to seeing. However, it was a showcase fight. So, was I a little bit annoyed by that? Yeah. But at the same time, I grew up with this title fight, 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 all brought to you by Don King and Showtime Championship Boxing. Or, pound for pound, the best fighters in the world fight here on HBO. So, maybe I should kind of, like I said, get with the times and just kind of accept the fact that, you know what, UFC, Zuffa Boxing, TKO, which I don't have a lot against them. I have some things that are concerns of mine, and well, why don't I get into it really quick? My biggest concern is it is a private equity company. Private private equity is looking to make money. I see what they did with the WWE. I remember when I was a kid, you could go to a WWE event all the way up to when I was an adult. The last WWE event I went to was probably 2004. It was a SmackDown taping. Eddie Guerrero was on it. I remember he smashed a limo window that Justin Hawk Bradshaw or whatever, JBL, Justin Layfield, something like that. Anyways, he smashed the window of the limo and everything there. Anyways, those tickets were $25. Now I see a lot of wrestling fans complaining about the cost of going to a WWE event, going to a paid live event, the pay-per-view, the major ones. You know, it kind of gets exhausting when the cost for the tickets are going so far up, and that's where my concern is with boxing. Don't get me wrong, boxing on the higher echelons of boxing have always been expensive to go to. Pay-per-view's been extremely expensive. That was probably the best thing about this Crawford Canelo fight, is that it was on Netflix. Anyone could watch it, and it was pretty much free, because I mean, I don't know too many people without a Netflix subscription, so, or at least access to one. I mean, so anyways, there were things that bugged me, but like I said, maybe it's just I need to kind of get a little bit with the times. I mean, TKO does a lot of things I liked. I like this. I like the slap fighting. I do follow UFC. I don't watch a whole bunch of them because there's just so many UFC cards now. I have some concerns. I think Doug and we spoke about some when we did the podcast together. I just laid out the other one. They're TKO's main goal is to make money, so my concern is, are the fighters going to get compensated properly, and are the fans going to have to pay a lot more to be a fan? However, that's also, I've also got to go the other way and say it hasn't been cheap to be a boxing fan. I mean, we've been paying up to $100 for a pay-per-view to watch fights on pay-per-view, so it could go both ways. We'll have to see. I'm in a big let's see where it's going attitude of it. First one, like I said, there are things that I personally didn't like, but that's also just my personal preferences. Nothing too big about that. Speaking about these super events that are more show than anything else, anyone tired of these exhibitions? I don't like the fact that Jake Paul and Gervonta Davis are doing an exhibition against each other. That is such a waste of time. I mean, what happened to Jake Paul fighting Anthony Joshua? I mean, as soon as Eddie Hearn said, okay, we'll do that fight, it seemed like any steam that had went away. It was just a Twitter war. It's like it was all of these little Twitter wars that Jake Paul gets into. Now he's going to fight Gervonta Davis. I mean, Gervonta Davis it's a good distraction from Gervonta Davis. I mean, if he goes in there and roughs up Jake Paul in an exhibition fight, maybe people will forget the fact that he lost to Roach. So, I mean, and he's not giving Roach a rematch. Or maybe, maybe people will, nobody's going to forget that Jake Paul doesn't fight somebody that he should be fighting. I mean, I don't get so down on Jake Paul except for these exhibition fights. The other exhibition fight I have a huge issue with is the announced Mike Tyson versus Floyd Mayweather. Oh man, that is one that I don't think anybody really wants to see other than these casual fans. I don't even know if I would call them a fan if you're wanting to see those two in the ring, because it's a spectacle. Just like Jake Paul versus Gervonta Davis, it's a spectacle. It's a mockery. It's a mockery of how great Floyd Mayweather was and how great Mike Tyson was, that they're getting in the ring and they're just gonna, I don't know what's gonna happen there. I mean, Floyd still has great reflexes. He's young enough where he still has great reflexes. He's going to be a lot faster than Mike. Mike has size, but that's about it. Um, he wasn't exactly light of foot against Jake Paul. He looks good in training. I mean, the training montages, he looked really good, but I mean, heck, I could probably work with a bodybuilder for a few days and come up with good training montages with him punching the mitts and the bag and everything. I mean, heck, if I were in better shape, I could probably put up a good looking training montage. I mean, it's not that hard to just splice little 5 or 10 second clips together and make it look like it looks great. Like this person's this wonderful boxer, but you get in the ring and it's completely different. I mean, you could have whatever conspiracy theory you have against the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight. However, you can't ignore the fact that Mike Tyson didn't look like he was even remotely prepared for a fight. I mean, that didn't even look like a good paid sparring session. So I don't know. I'm just over it, kind of over watching these things. I mean, honestly, I watched the Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight. I haven't watched a lot of Jake Paul's stuff. I haven't, and I'm not going to order this either of these exhibitions, and I wish they weren't happening. I wish that, I mean, bravo to the Georgia Commission for saying that they're not going to allow the Gervonta Davis Jake Paul exhibition in Georgia, but shame on the Florida Commission of saying, hey, just bring it down here. So anyways, that's my thoughts on those exhibitions. Hopefully they start going away. I hope nobody gets hurt. I would hate to see one of these older, legends like Mike Tyson get extremely hurt in one of these fights. I mean, because it definitely could happen. I mean, this is the hurt game. It is an exhibition, but people have heart attacks when they're out on a jog. So, anyways, transitioning, I wanted to talk a little bit about the All Heart card. The whole card, it looks like it's on BoxRec now. Bishop Lay versus Jacob Blasco. That's a 6-rounder. Dylan Alvarado versus Christian Alvarez. That's a 6-rounder. Those are your 2 featured bouts. The next featured bout would be Bobby Tabil versus Elio Hernandez. That's going to be a good fight. I wouldn't be surprised if that looked a little bit like looked a little bit like Christian Mabili versus Lester Martinez. I'm just expecting a good scrap out of that one. Of course, Sean Cross versus Dan Castro, John Castro versus Jacob Diaz. Mario Gutierrez is going to be back. This is his 3rd straight Rival Series card. All 3 of them fighting Rene Mendoza. I know that that looks like the finalized card, and I know that that's going to be a good, entertaining card. And let me put a plug. I know I talk a lot about the All Heart cards and whatnot. They're the only pro boxing promotion going on in Utah right now. So, of course, me being a bigger boxing fan than I am MMA, I'm going to definitely plug the people who are doing pro boxing here in Utah. whether or not, well, regardless of the fact that Jason and Monica are giving me a great opportunity to be part of the color commentary team, it's just kind of, even if I was just going to these fights and writing in the on the Substack or putting out this blog afterwards, getting some interviews and everything like I do, even if that's all I was doing, I would still plug them and give them a huge plug, because these guys, Monica and Jason, are doing so much work, so much hard work to put on these cards. And they're risking a ton. I mean, these cards are not cheap to put on. I remember when I was putting on cards with Tracy Spinks, and when I was putting on cards with Ed Mindy, there would be somewhere between $12,000 to $20,000 easily spent on these cards. Easily. And you got to remember, that was 2013 was the last card that Tracy and I put on. So those expenses, cost of insurance, cost of bond, and everything, those all go up. I wouldn't be surprised if the DeCarlos are putting out, anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000 to put on these cards. So what does that mean? That means if they don't sell between 600 to 800 tickets, they're not making money off these cards. They're breaking even. If they sell fewer cards than that, fewer tickets than that, they're losing money. And I told this to Eddie Cordova when he was out putting on cards, I said, I respect anyone, and I respect and support anyone who's out there doing what you guys are doing. And, it's not the easiest thing to do in the world to put up that much money to try to give these young fighters an opportunity. And that's what they're doing. These fighters are getting the opportunity to get experience in their own backyard. They might not be making a whole ton of money on their purses. However, they're getting fights that they could win, or fights that are even. They're not going up against a national amateur champion, international amateur champion, Olympian, going out there getting paid pretty well, getting paid like $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 to go out there and not have a chance. And not only not have a chance, but if they look bad, then they might not get another chance. If they look bad enough, they might be suspended indefinitely. If they're hurt bad enough, they might not be able to fight again. These fights give our local fighters an opportunity to fight fights that are either on an equal footing or a chance to get a win or two, to get valuable experience so they could go on the road with more confidence, more experience, to have a better chance against some of these guys they might be being fed to the wolves. And that's just me being real. And so I'm excited for All Heart. If there's another pro boxing promotion that comes up, if Flash starts promoting again, if another group starts promoting cards, I'll support them and I'll talk them up as well. Utah is a great place to be a fight fan. I'm going to tell you that. Utah is a great place to be a fight fan. If you want MMA, there's Fierce and Stillfist. If you want boxing, there's All Heart. There's a ton of amateur cards. Fulmer Center's always, if you're not following them on social media, you need to be following the Fulmer Center. They always have cards. Mountain Force is doing an amateur card the night after the All Heart card. There's FightCon coming up that's going to have amateur fights being put together by War Room and Fierce Fighting is doing MMA fights. So, and that's not including TKO bringing a paid live event for WWE, if you're a wrestling fan, and TKO bringing at least three UFC fights over the next year and a half. So if you're a fight fan in Utah and you're not satisfied, if you can't find fights to go to, you're either not looking hard enough, but I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you know that you know what's out there. You just don't want to go. Anyways, so moving on, I wanted to touch on Ricky Hatton. Once again, if you're listening to this, you already know that Ricky Hatton passed away on Sunday. They found him passed away on Sunday. A lot of talk about his struggles with mental illness, his struggle with drugs and alcohol. I mean, I'm not going to beat around the bush. When Ricky Hatton was fighting, he would get up to around 200 pounds. I mean, he was a 140-pound fighter most of his career, 140, 147, super lightweight, welterweight fighter. He would get up to over 200 pounds in between fights. One of the reasons why he fought, he only fought once a year, fought every 6 to 8 months, is because it took him that much time to take the weight off and be able to fight again. To say he didn't always take care of himself in between fights would be an understatement. I'm one to talk, but that's from, if you watched some of the interviews with him between fights. I mean, it was what it was. A lot of fighters do it. A lot of fighters gain a lot of weight in between fights. Kind of happens if you're not anticipating on fighting and you let your diet go and everything. I mean, some of these fighters, someone like a Terence Crawford, a Canelo Alvarez, Floyd Mayweather, that seem like they're timeless, that they seem like they could fight on forever. One of the reasons why they're able to do that is they're always in the gym. They're always in shape. They never lose their physique. Roy Jones was another one of them. So anyways, going back to Ricky Hatton, a few memories stick out. I remember when he defeated Kostya Tszyu. I had just started writing for Boxing Talk around that time. I can't remember if I'd have to look at the dates. I can't remember if I was actually writing for them or if I was a regular in Greg Leone's mailbag. Anyways, I remember hardly anybody gave Ricky Hatton a shot at winning that fight. Most people thought Ricky Hatton, he was the WBU 140-pound champion, and WBU is, I don't know. I mean, for a little bit of time, they were kind of like the IBO, the fifth belt, the belt that you would see fighters with, but you didn't really pay as much attention to it, that you might think could become the next big sanctioning body. I mean, I'm over the four belt era personally, but if you wanted to say there's a fifth belt, you would either say IBO. Back then, you might say WBU. But he had that WBU belt. He was fighting in sold-out soccer arenas. So, he was able to get Kostya Tszyu over to fight in England. Gave him a huge purse. I mean, Ricky's kind of like Floyd Mayweather, where fighters fought him because there was so much money to be made by fighting him. He brought Kostya Tszyu in there, and boxing history, he defeated the great Kostya Tszyu, Hall of Famer, and he went on a really good run at 140 pounds, beating a lot of good fighters. The fight with Ricky Hatton that sticks out to me the most was the fight with Manny Pacquiao. I was expecting a much better fight. My friend George and I, we ordered that fight. He was a roommate at the time. George, he suffered from spina bifida and was in a wheelchair, and George would go to the gym with me. This is back around 2009, 2010. When George and I, we lived together. He'd go to the gym with me, and he would hit the heavy bag while I was going in there. Maybe I'd have somebody in there sparring or hitting the mitts, or doing, because that was probably the height of me being a pro. George would go in there, and there's a ton of stories with me and George. Unfortunately, we lost George a few years ago. He had an infection on his foot that grew, and unfortunately, he passed away. But anyways, back to Ricky Hatton. Sorry, I get lost sometimes. We ordered that fight, and we invited a whole bunch of people over. We were expecting a whole bunch of people over. It ended up being just George and I watching that fight. We got the pizza. We had everything. We're sitting there. We're ready to go for this great main event. We expected an all-action fight. Well, it was all action for the short amount of time that it was, and Manny Pacquiao ended up dominating that fight, as we all know. And I remember sitting there and just kind of in awe for how Manny Pacquiao performed, but then being concerned about Ricky, because he was brutally knocked out. I mean, the fact that he kept getting up and kept trying, that fight shouldn't have gotten out of the first round, but because Ricky was such a warrior, they gave him the opportunity to keep on going. Ricky wasn't a Floyd Mayweather going to make you miss and make you pay all the time. He did take a lot of punches in his career, and it kind of makes me wonder, with all of the things that he spoke about in the last few years about his battles with drugs and alcoholism and wanting to take his life and whatnot, it really makes me wonder, and I hope that, I hope they do research his brain to see if he was suffering from CTE or whatnot. I mean, I understand if his family and his friends don't want to go down that road, but it's kind of one of those things. It just really makes me wonder about CTE and the effects on CTE and how many boxers are out there. I mean, if you've ever looked me up, I'm 1-3 with one no contest. I'm essentially 1-4. Been knocked out. I've had thousands of rounds of sparring. I had 40 amateur fights. And I had a ton of smoker fights. I've had a lot of exhibitions, not a Floyd versus not a Floyd versus Mike Tyson type of exhibition. I mean, but I did a lot of those things. I've taken a lot of punches in my life, and I know that I'm not as sharp as I used to be, and I'm not as sharp as I should be had I not boxed. Would I change it? Would I give it up? Would I give up all the memories and all the times from me being an active boxer? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't trade that for anything. I'm going to go on record to say that. Wouldn't trade all the memories, everything, even the hard ones. I wouldn't trade that for anything. But it makes me think, with Ricky Hatton, if he suffered from CTE or other brain damage, and how many, with all of the thousands of fighters there are and have been throughout the years, how many fighters do suffer from CTE or forms of brain damage and whatnot from participating in combat sports and boxing. Boxing's different than MMA. In MMA, if you're taking too many punches and everything, it's okay to tap out. It's okay to give up and fight another day. In boxing, it's not. Boxing, it's growing more acceptable to quit on your stool or whatnot. But I remember when Gennaro Hernandez quit on his stool against Oscar De La Hoya, he suffered a huge backlash over that. And other fighters did. It wasn't as honorable to quit on your stool. Not only that, you look at the Ricky Hatton versus Manny Pacquiao fight, and you wonder how much damage did Ricky Hatton sustain in that fight. I mean, you could tell that he was probably concussed after the first knockdown, and then he kept going. So, and that happens all the time in boxing. You get buzzed, you get hit hard. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. So, I hope that Ricky Hatton's family looks for answers like that, but if they don't want to, I definitely understand and respect that decision as well. I loved watching Ricky Hatton, though. He was a fun fighter to watch. Kind of want to move on from there. Tie that into something else that I wanted to talk about. So, another quick story from the interesting life of Charles Presnell, boxer, reporter, whatnot. In 2005, September 17th, 2005, I made a trip to Las Vegas. This was my first really big Las Vegas card at the MGM Grand that I went to, and it was a good one. I believe the tagline was Parade of Champions, and it had some good fighters, good fun. The main event was Marco Antonio Barrera versus Robbie Peden. It was a title unification fight. Robbie Peden was the IBF champion. If anybody remembers, that he won that title by knocking out Nate Campbell, and then he in a fight that Nate Campbell was doing really well in, and then decided to stick his chin out, and he got knocked out. Or was that... Wait, that was the first fight. He knocked out Nate Campbell again in the second fight to win the vacant title. But that's where most people remember Robbie Peden, was knocking out Nate Campbell. Nate Campbell turned out to be still a pretty gifted fighter. He ended up winning some world titles and whatnot. However, he was fighting the great Marco Antonio Barrera. This was the second time I got to see Marco Antonio Barrera fight. Barrera is one of the great Mexican fighters. Great boxer too. I mean, he didn't start out that way. Kind of like Canelo. You could draw a lot of parallels with Canelo. Both of them started out more aggressive, more knock you out, and then transitioned to being good pure boxers. So that was the main event, and of course Marco Antonio Barrera won that. Lots of good fights. Sugar Shane Mosley was on there. He fought Jose Luis Cruz, who was 33-0 at the time. He had 2 draws as well. He won that fight. I thought he won it pretty easily. There was one fight card that was a little closer than it should have been, but Abner Mars fought on that card. Vicente Escobedo fought on that card. Greg Piper. Escobedo fought a guy named Greg Piper, who actually I saw fight a couple of times as well. The cool thing is Kofi Jantua fought Hinklant Lau in the walkout bout, and Lou DiBella actually asked me to videotape that fight. And I remember Scott Schaefer, who was DiBella's lawyer, and he's the editor and owner of Boxing Talk now. They asked me to film that, and then I gave them the tape afterwards. And Scott Schaefer, after getting the tape, had advised me, hey, next time we ask you to do this, work on commentating. Commentate during the fight. That way we get an idea on what kind of commentator you would be. That way we can maybe get you some commentating gigs. Boy, I wish that I would have listened to that. Maybe I wouldn't be making my commentary debut next week. Maybe I would have been doing that for the last 20 years. Anyways, that was a decent fight. Quick story about Kofi Jantua and that fight. Not relating to him, however, I had just gotten off the phone with Scott after the press conference, and I had Kofi Jantua on my mind. Didn't necessarily know what he looked like at that time, and I'm walking around, and I see Floyd Mayweather Sr., and I know you're going to think, how could you mistake Floyd Mayweather Sr. for Kofi Jantua? Well, it was just Kofi was on my mind. So I walk up to Floyd Mayweather Sr. I knew who he was, and I asked him, hey, could I get an interview with you? And he said, absolutely. I pull out the camera, go to turn it on, and I say, hi, Boxing Talk here with Kofi Jantua. And his smile goes to a frown. He pushes the camera down. He said, son, turn that off. So I turned it off, and he said, I'm not Kofi. My name is Floyd Mayweather Sr., and this interview's over. Got up and walked away and said a few things. I understand. I wouldn't be offended, but I could understand how somebody could be offended by somebody in the media not knowing who he is. So I get it. Never held a grudge against him. Just an interesting story. The other thing that I wanted to talk about that kind of ties into the whole brain damage conversation I was talking about, Ricky Hatton, is the main co-feature of that card was Leavander Johnson defending his IBF lightweight title against Jesus Chavez. Leavander was one of those fighters that was just always there. He got several shots at the lightweight title, and finally he made good. He finally won the lightweight title, and he was making his first and what was his only defense against Jesus Chavez. I remember seeing him the day before the fight out on the strip, and he was running. This was probably about 5 a.m. He was out for a run. We saw each other. We said hi. I didn't know him. He probably didn't know me. We probably saw each other around because, it was a big fight week. He was walking around. I saw him, he probably, as I think about it, I saw him in the press area a couple of times. Now, when you go to a big event like this, there's an actual press room that you go into that you could go in, and if you hang out in there long enough, if you have the credential and you hang out in there long enough during fight week, you might get to talk to just about anyone. Oscar De La Hoya, I got to talk with him, tried to get an interview, but then he was pulled away really quick. Richard Schaefer, who at the time was the guy for Golden Boy, just Sugar Shane Mosley, just everybody. I ran into them just hanging out. Anyways, I saw him, kind of gave him a nod and everything, went and talked to his dad, who was standing in the lobby of the MGM Grand where we were staying, and talked to him for a minute, and he's like, Leavander is out there running. He needs to take a little bit of weight off for the weigh-in tonight, but we'll be good. Now, I had been given in order to make sure that I interview Leavander Johnson after the fight, and also in that interview ask him about fighting Marco Antonio Barrera, because that was kind of like the cash out fight that they were looking for, the big money fight they were looking for him, and they were in negotiations for that fight. Barrera, of course, had to beat Peden, and Leavander Johnson would have had to have beat Jesus Chavez. Fight happened how it happened. Jesus Chavez won that fight, and we all know Leavander Johnson passed away shortly after that fight due to a subdural hematoma. He was put in it. It really is a surreal time when you're sitting there in press row, because when you're in press row, you hear things that other fans in the arena don't hear, and that isn't necessarily reported right away. So I remember that watching that fight. After the fight, just the body language of Leavander Johnson when he was walking out of the ring, he looked like he had given everything he could. He had taken a tremendous beating. I mean, I believe there was a record for the amount of punches landed by a lightweight in that fight, if I remember right. There was something like that happened, that they were telling us that there was a punch record that was broken. He definitely was trying to win that fight the entire time, giving it all. I mean, you figure if he fought Marco Antonio Barrera and it was on pay-per-view or whatnot, he was probably making 7 figures, or at least high 6 figures, which for a lightweight back then was a lot of money. So something like that you could retire on, you could take care of your family for the rest. It's just one of those things that I remember sitting in press row, and all of a sudden in the middle of the Marco Antonio Barrera versus Robbie Peden fight, which was a decent scrap, but it kind of was going the way everybody thought it would, with Barrera winning it. All of a sudden you started hearing, well, before you started hearing that, before the main event started, Lou DiBella came up and he made sure that he let us all know, hey, their boy looked good, but my boy looked better. Probably still trying to make it so they could salvage negotiating Leavander Johnson a big fight. And then in the middle of the main event, the chatter, the discussion around press row was that Leavander Johnson had passed out in his dressing room and was being rushed to the hospital. And I remember I went to that fight. One of my roommates and I, we went to that fight together. We got in the truck and drove out there. And I remember this, after Leavander Johnson passed, just kind of the surreal thing when we were talking about it and just saying, we watched a man get beat to death. And when you think about it like that, and I didn't mean to chuckle a little bit there, when you think about it like that, it really is surreal that these guys, when they go out and they get it, when you step between those ropes, you realize that there is a lot of danger in going into those fights, and that sometimes the best things don't happen. I mean, I would have to say probably 99.9% of the time with the card, everybody goes home. Maybe there's some broken bones, maybe there's some cuts, maybe there's some minor injuries. And then that 1% of the time there's a major injury where somebody is majorly hurt. But this is the fight game. This is a dangerous sport, and that's why I circle back around to Ricky Hatton and with the amount of punches that he took in his career, amateur and professional, um, it concerns me. And I posted something the other night during the Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford fight about the Mabili Martinez fight, that title fights need to be 12 rounds. And I truly believe that, because I think Lester Martinez, had that fight been a 12 rounder, would have pulled it out. The counter to that would be, how many fewer punches would a fighter take in his career if title fights were only 10 rounds? I don't know what's to think about there. Well, I've talked for a long time, so I'm going to go ahead and end this. I appreciate everybody. Went on a little bit longer than I expected, but I haven't done this for a couple weeks. Do apologize. I meant to do this earlier in the week. I'm going to have to go get a root canal on Monday. It's not going to affect me doing color commentary or anything. Obviously, I'm still doing this, but yeah, my mouth was in a lot of pain and just wanting to go to bed and everything. My old body. Anyways, thanks for listening. Hope you guys all are doing great. Look forward to seeing you out and about at one of these cards, especially the All Heart card. Like I said, I want to see over 1,000 people. That would make me really happy. Anyways, have a great weekend and take care.